Hi, I'm Teresa from Phoenix Gate Crafts, and today I'm doing something a little bit different on a couple different levels. First of all, this is nothing to do with fiber or fiber arts. I have been watching some videos where some YouTubers have been knitting or crocheting and talking about something pretty much unrelated. So I decided to go ahead and try that. On the screen, you're actually going to see me making some thread hoppers. These are an item that I sell in my Etsy shop. I will provide a link in the description box if you're interested in purchasing any of these. These are very handy if you do cross stitch. But I've got a bee in my bonnet to talk about Avatar: The Last Airbender, which I know has absolutely nothing to do with fiber or fiber arts. I just figured something fun to chit chat about, get my thoughts and feelings off of my chest on this subject. And at the same time, maybe you have something to craft too, so you have a little bit of entertainment, especially if you love Avatar: The Last Airbender original TV show, which yes, it is a cartoon, the same way that I do. Because here's my thesis statement of the day, which is Avatar: The Last Airbender cannot be adapted effectively. Now, why do I say this? There's actually several different things. The first one being that the animation is perfect. Now, the animation style, it's very jumpy in the first season. It does get better overall. It's that combination of cartoon 2D animation with some 3D effects that was very popular in the early 2000s. The show came around in about 2006, I believe. I was in college at the time. My roommate actually introduced me to it because I had gotten her into actual anime. And real quick, no, technically Avatar: The Last Airbender is not anime because anime is Japanese cartoons. And Avatar: The Last Airbender is an American show. And especially in the first season, you can definitely see the hallmarks of Nickelodeon animation stylings, even though they did take a lot of influence from anime. It technically, I don't feel, is anime, though a lot of people make the assertion that it is anime style, which is valid, even if you're wrong. Just kidding. Anyway, but animation is the perfect medium for Avatar: The Last Airbender. Now, if you don't know what I'm talking about, this whole thing's going to be gibberish because you haven't seen the show or something. I highly recommend going to see it. The original series, as of recording this, is available to watch on, what's it called? Netflix. There we go. I'm not cutting this, so sorry for all the throat clearing and everything. I'm doing a lazy today. Sorry about that. Anyway, if you go to Netflix, you can watch the original series. You can also watch the live action remake show. I think the M. Night Shyamalan movie is not on there anymore. Every place I looked to watch that movie, which is kind of the worst, requires money. Do not do it. It is not worth it. They should not be rewarded for making a terrible movie. And then there is also a spin-off sequel series called The Legend of Korra, which I believe you can also watch on Netflix. And I have feelings about all of this because absolutely none of these, aside from the original series, is very good. Some people love The Legend of Korra, which is a valid perspective, even though the vast majority of people don't agree that it's as good as the original Avatar: The Last Airbender. The live action remake show is pretty okay, but it's not great. And ultimately, the best one is still the original. And there's lots of videos out on the internet as to why, from like a storytelling perspective, this, that, the other thing. But I have my own perspective on why absolutely no other series can capture the magic. And ultimately, my belief is that they're always trying to change something that is the core of why the original series just works so well. And I feel that the first one, as I said earlier, is animation. 2D animation is perfect for the original show. First of all, with cartoons, specifically 2D animation, there is a suspension of disbelief you do with a cartoon that you do not do with live action. When we watch live action, we want it to look as real as possible. So we actually watch something that's supposed to be live action with a lot more criticism in our minds. And anything that gives us uncanny valley or just doesn't look quite right or is a little bit too silly, messes with the tone, we look at a lot more critically than we do with animation. And by the way, cartoons are harder than live action. Getting a bunch of people to go and stand there and look the way you want to, that is a lot easier than trying to coordinate voice acting, timing the mouth flaps, and the visual storytelling that is required of animation. It is far harder to do animation from everything I've been told, as somebody who cannot draw. But it's just like when we watch The Little Mermaid and we are watching Sebastian the Crab sing about how life is better down where it's wetter under the sea. Like, we watched the live action version of that and it didn't have the magic, even though everything looked almost photoreal. It didn't have the magic of the original cartoon simply because we're not questioning in the cartoon whether or not Sebastian the Crab can sing, because we know crabs can't talk and it's just a cartoon. So we're okay with that. It's just like when you watch something on a stage, we know that people are doing all these quick changes and set changes and everything right there in front of us. And that's part of the magic of what's happening, versus when we watch the movie of it, it's like 10 times worse and very much a matter of, oh, I don't care. We have that same thing with animation where it's okay, silly stuff happening. It's also a lot easier to show water moving or fire, and Zuko's scar really pops up because the big problem with M. Night Shyamalan's movie is, okay, one of the many issues with the M. Night Shyamalan movie is that you can't see Zuko's scar because it looks like a real scar. I'm sorry, they don't show up as red all that often. The live action TV show definitely had Zuko's scar looking better, but it never is as prominent or as big of a character feature as the original show. Also, with animation, you can do a lot of things that look better. Because here's the thing, with real people, you expect them to have weight. You expect that with a real life person, they don't stretch. There's a lot of kind of storytelling elements that happen with how animation kind of works. Like, if you watch the pilot episode of the original Avatar series versus the pilot episode of the remake, in both of them you see Aang flying. After Aang is awoken in the original series and taken out of the iceberg, he does this big old sneeze down to the ground that shoots him a good 100 feet or so into the air. And then he slides down the side of the iceberg and just kind of returns to his place in front of Sokka and Katara. And it's no big deal. And we just believe that this can happen because drawings don't have weight. Real people have weight. So when we see the live action and we see Aang floating and flying around in the opening, in his introductory sequence, it looks weird. Part of it is I realized they stretch Aang when he's swooshing around. They try to make him look like he's going faster because they actually stretch the 3D model that is standing in for the actor kid. And it looks weird. We get this huge uncanny valley effect. And then, he does this land thing, some little hand wavy movements, and then he's up and jumping around and flying again. And I know a lot of people are like, but where's his glider? And I'm sitting there like, he doesn't look like he's a person with weight. This doesn't look right. He's not landing like somebody who weighs around 100 pounds should land. And he's doing all of these movements and he looks way too weightless. And then with the stretch animation, it looks wrong because human bodies don't stretch that way. But all of those are techniques that they use in the original show. Not a big deal. And that's because 2D animation works because of that suspension of disbelief. Whereas trying to make it look real, we're like, no, that's not real. The second thing is that real life people have different pacing and different expressions and communication styles than animation can. So, well, let's just talk about the expressiveness because that's the easy one. If you take any shot in any animated movie, so let's say The Lion King, the cartoon one, and you stop it in one spot, I might show a just still image of something and just tell me what's emotionally going on right there. This is why cartoons are actually much more approachable for kids, is because they are not subtle with the expressions. Real people, they say it's 70% how you say something, only 10% what you say, and about 20% what you look, or something to that effect, that actually communicates everything. But when I took a speech class in college, one of the big things they said is that a good 80% or so of your nerves and your feelings do not get expressed to the audience. So you could stand up there completely nervous, and as long as you're able to make your mouth move and you don't sound like a complete idiot, people can't tell that you're nervous. And that's actually something that happens a lot of the time with movies. They need to overact a little bit in order to be half as expressive as a single still shot in a cartoon. And that's something that really affects a lot of humor in the live action, because humor with real people is different than humor with cartoons. Sokka having this over-the-top way of talking and very sarcastic, and the over-expressiveness of the Sokka character works so well in the cartoon. And you can have joke, 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 serious moment, joke. Slapstick works a lot better because nobody's getting hurt. And somebody gets smacked and they just turn and then they come back and then they make a quip. All of that can happen a lot faster in animation, especially since animation only takes like 22 minutes for a half an hour show. However, the beats fall different with real people because people move at a different pace. Again, because of that weight thing, but also because of that expressiveness thing and how so little expression comes through. So they need different jokes because the jokes land in a different way because of that expression. And also because people just move slower. When we have real people, we need to actually make things connect a little bit better. So, for example, if you have a group of people who are live action walking down a hall, we need to see enough of them entering the hall, walking and talking, and then arriving at the other end of the hall so that we have a sense of time and place. However, with cartoons, because none of it's real anyway, we don't have to have that connection of place and time. They can start a conversation at the beginning of the hall, talk, and you just kind of see them bobbing a little bit, and then all of a sudden they're at the end of the hall because we don't know how big that hall is anyway. It doesn't matter. And in fact, a lot of cartoons don't really have floor plans in a lot of cases. The really good ones do, but if you watch an actual anime called Ouran High School Host Club, one of the things they had to do to the manga artist was ask for a floor plan so they could make things a little bit more consistent with where doors are and everything. And the fact of the matter is, she didn't have one. And I don't know if they ever actually sorted out where the doors were in the music classroom that most of the show takes place in. It sure doesn't feel like it because it's all so weird and silly, and we're not paying attention to it anyway because Tamaki is completely ridiculous and absolutely hilarious. So a lot of things can kind of get glossed over in animation that can't get glossed over in live action. And because of this, we can have the live action, which has an extra 10 minutes for the whole series, and it doesn't even cover half the amount of storytelling volume as the original series, just because people take longer. You need to have that connective tissue to make everything make sense. So less gets covered in live action. And the last thing is something that partly is well, let's try that again. The last thing kind of affects remakes, but it also really affects sequels. And that the changes made really need to hit a balance between what is changed and what is kept. And it really is a matter of Theseus's ship. So Theseus's ship is this thought experiment about, Theseus has a ship that is made of wood and you replace a plank. Is it still Theseus's ship? Well, then you have to change more things and more things and more things. And at what point with all of these changes does it no longer continue being Theseus's ship and is instead a whole new ship? Hold on, let me go get my dog real quick. She is back inside and drinking some water. Anyway, the big deal with Theseus's ship when it comes to remaking a TV show or making a sequel is you never know what plank of the ship was something that a fan loved. And there's a lot to love in Avatar: The Last Airbender. there is a unique friendship dynamic between all of the characters, between their personalities, their talents, their weaknesses, and the fact that they are allowed to have weaknesses and be incomplete people, and pretty much everybody has a character arc. One of the biggest complaints is always Sokka. Like, they do the worst character assassinations on the character Sokka in every remake because he doesn't translate well. His humor does not translate well to live action because timing issues, whatnot. But in the M. Night Shyamalan version, he's not funny at all, and they renamed him Sokka, which nobody knew they cared about the pronunciation of the characters' names until they were changed to be more, quote-unquote, authentic to the different cultures. And then they tried to maintain the humor in the live-action show, but again, it falls a little bit flat because the lack of expression that real people are capable of. But also they took away his sexism because a big part of his arc is his sexism becomes genuine respect for women. And he gains self-confidence because a lot of sexism is sequestered in a lack of self-confidence in men. At least one theory of it. We're not discussing that. Let's be nice in the comments about that. But you take away these core traits, and no matter what you do, Sokka doesn't adapt well. I've even read some of the sequel comics, and that again is a very different medium, and a lot of the humor from the show that requires timing doesn't work there either. He's just not a funny character. They try. It doesn't work so well because of the medium. And when you've got a character whose humor is such a core part of all the group dynamics, even though a lot of what he does is just fluff. Not all of it, just some of it. But that fluff is a core tone creator for the entire series. And all of a sudden, even if that wasn't the only thing they changed, and it wasn't the only thing they changed, but even if it was the only thing they changed, that would be enough to make it feel completely different because they're not getting the core of who that character is. Dominic Noble does this series called Lost in Adaptation, and more often than not, a really good adaptation from a book to a movie is not the fact that it's word for word or the fact that they capture everything as written. It's the fact that they get the spirit of the characters. And Sokka as a character with so much spirit that there's no way not to assassinate him. But even beyond that, excuse me. Even beyond that, other characters are capturing that spirit is so hard because so much of that is the voice actor. Because the kid who played Aang is a goofy goober who has over-exaggerated smiles and is very silly and heartwarming in real life, at least from the bits that I've seen. And he brought that bit of him into the character in the voice acting. And having a character who is reciting how you're supposed to feel at you, it doesn't capture the actual spirit because we never really see him being super goofy. We never see him penguin sledding because in every adaptation, that silly scene that is establishing Aang as a character is deleted because it's hard and it would have to be 100% CGI. Like, that is a board that makes the Avatar, The Last Airbender's Theseus ship. And you do enough of this and all of a sudden you have Boomy, who is no longer lovable. He's just angry. He's not crazy. He's just a pissy old man, and I don't like him as a character on his own or anything else. And it really is a balance of what gets adapted, what doesn't. And yes, you do have to make cuts and make changes. And you're always going to have the people who are like, I want the same thing, but live action. And then you're going to be seeing people who are like, I don't care if they change things as long as they get the spirit of the piece, which is more the end that I land on, because I have the fairly unpopular opinion that if you're not comparing the Avatar live action show to the original show, I think it works pretty well as a show in its own right. Is it as good? No. But I think it functions independently just fine. But even with that lens of trying to not directly compare it to the original series, I still don't like Boomy. I just, he's not a likable character, and it has nothing to do with the actor, the young dude who played him, and it has everything to do with the fact that they just didn't write him likable. And the last thing really deals more with the sequel, which is you really can't contradict existing lore and history and how the magic system works. Now, I say this really applies to the sequel, so I'm going to talk a lot about The Legend of Korra, but the big criticism in the M. Night Shyamalan about the magic system is that it's not consistent. In the original series, you have a whole bunch of like one move does one thing. So, for example, you do the wax off motion from the Karate Kid, and that will pull up your element and use it to block an incoming elemental attack. They do that a lot. I mean, they have different fighting styles for each different element bending, which is really cool, but you've got that one move, one reaction thing. Somebody lands really hard on the ground, and all of a sudden there is a big seismic wave in all the rocks and earth surrounding them. And the big thing also is that firebending comes from the spirit. Uncle Iroh even says it, I believe, in the pilot, where he says firebending comes from the breath. Because, spoiler alert for something in season 3, fire is also representative of life, although the Fire Nation uses hate and anger to fuel their firebending, because firebending doesn't require existing fire in order to bend it. They can create it from themselves. And then all of a sudden in the M. Night Shyamalan version, they need existing fire to bend from. They can't just make it themselves. And all of a sudden, only the most powerful firebenders can create their own fire, which they try to make into this big thing with Uncle Iroh in the climax of the movie, and it just doesn't work, because we're like, yeah, no, this is a basic tenet of the original series. And something similar happens in The Legend of Korra, where instead of having all these stylized different moves for doing different things, all of a sudden it's very much just brawler, throwing punches, and things move, which takes out some of the spirit of it. But the big thing in Legend of Korra that really pissed a lot of people off is all of a sudden, instead of having blue and orange morality and a very liquid, honestly, it's a soft magic system, all of a sudden they're trying to change the lore and change it into more of a hard, I don't know if it's a hard magic system, but it's kind of a hard lore system. Sorry, I'm just taking a drink of water real quick. So in the original series, with spirits kind of have this humanity about them. They're different. They work on some different rules that we're not familiar with. But it really makes sense when the giant panda spirit, we're not introduced to him as a giant panda spirit. He's the Heibai spirit, and he looks panda-esque because he's black and white, but he's got these extra arms, and he's very angry because his forest got burnt down. And there's this big, weird acid trip through the spirit world because it's Aang's first time in the spirit world. And we're just as confused and lost as he is. And he winds up having a conversation that calms the Heibai spirit down, and he leaves as his soft panda-y self, and he returns all the people he kidnapped. But that it isn't seen as a good thing, because a spirit going on a rampage destroying a village is a bad thing. But his anger is justified because he was the spirit of this forest and the firebenders burnt it down. So his anger is justified. Just like real people and real feelings are very complex. And although, yeah, the little lecture at the end is a little too simple, but remember, it's a kid's movie and it's a cartoon, so we can let it pass. But then all of a sudden in Legend of Korra, we have good and evil spirits in Rava and Vatu. And it doesn't help that this whole thing contradicts the lore we've already been told. Because everything with Avatar: The Last Airbender is balance. The firebenders are trying to take over the world. They're throwing the world out of balance. And so the Avatar is countering them to bring the world back into balance. Now, they did try to turn Rava and Vatu into a symbol of yin yang, which shows up a lot through Avatar. Like the koi fish are the ocean and the moon spirits. They are yin and yang, as Ko's spirit stealer, or Ko the face stealer, my mistake, says at one point. That's the code to figure out who the spirits are. I know I'm totally giving everything away. I should have done a spoiler warning at the beginning for, these shows that are decades old. But anyway. But here's the thing. Rava is the good spirit of order and light, and Vatu is the spirit of chaos and evil and darkness. So you've got the good guy and the bad guy. And one of the big things that very few people talk about, I haven't seen anybody talk about it yet, and Hello Future Me has a wonderful video. I can't find it. If I can, I'll link it. About how Rava and Vatu, the two episodes that tell you how the first Avatar came to be, just flat out sucks. But he never mentions the fact that we have one line in the original series about how we know that if the Avatar dies in the Avatar state, there will be no more Avatar cycle. The Avatar cycle will end. There will be no more rebirths. And although we don't know how the Avatar cycle started to begin with, we know how it'll end, but we don't know how we know it'll end that way. Aside from the fact that a previous Avatar tells Aang this. So there's questions we want answered, and we think we're going to get them with the Rava and Vatu story arc about how the first Avatar came to be. So instead of having complex morality, all of a sudden we have this good and evil, angel, demon kind of dichotomy that didn't exist before. For a kids' show, Avatar The Last Airbender really handles nuance very well that, let's face it, none of the adaptations do, which is a different problem and part of the Theseus ship issue. But on top of that, we find out how Rava bonds with Wan, the first Avatar, and that's how the Avatar cycle gets started. And then they bind Vaatu, who is then released, and then you have the big, stupid kaiju battle that has absolutely no cleverness to it. It's basically a kaiju battle version of the fight that Aang and the Fire Lord have at the end of the original series, with the battle for dominance over taking Fire Lord Ozai's powers away, which is complete BS for Korra because it wasn't necessary. They could have done anything better than that. But they never answer. They create this Vaatu character that could have totally been like a second Avatar. He could have bound with somebody else. And then while he was in the Avatar state, Vaatu could have been killed. The spirit could have died. And that's how we know that there are not going to be any more avatars. Or by the avatar dying while in the Avatar state, the spirit that's bonding all the different life forces together gets sent back to the spirit world, and that's how he wound up trapped. Like, there's lots of options they could have gone with that could have explained this one little bit of lore that was so important in the original series but never got explained. Like, they could have just done better. And not to mention, they interrupted a perfectly good storyline in order to do this. And that's the big thing. They were going with something that was actually very Avatar familiar, dealing with shades of gray. They're talking about the North Pole and the South Pole having a bit of a civil war and fighting and versus unifying, and there is no right answer, which is very morally blue and orange. Like, there isn't a right or a wrong. They're just different colors, different perspectives. And all of a sudden you wind up with this completely different storyline with a different tangent, and it's just this about face that makes no sense. Like, it's bad storytelling on Korra's part, and it was unnecessary, and it contradicts the lore we were already given, and it doesn't fit in. And this is where a lot of people who were kind of on the fence because of all the other Theseus ship issues with all of a sudden all the steampunk, which I'm not a person who particularly likes 1920s steampunk style. So I felt it jarring going to a big New York City style city after all the quaint villages and very Asian aesthetic of the original series. And then all of a sudden having this on top of all that, like pro bending instead of pro wrestling, it just wound up being one thing way too many, and it lost me. And I stuck through season 3 and the Zahir thing, and then all of a sudden in season 4 with the Kuvira thing, and I'm like, I don't care anymore. And this brings up the last point I really want to make, which is when you make a spin-off or a retelling or an adaptation or whatever, but you expect somebody to have watched the original in order to understand this. And I'm going to switch TV shows a little bit because this is the problem I think Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood has in the opening bit versus the original TV series, which had taken a lot of liberties on the original manga. But it did a really good job getting people invested and really getting into like the Shao Tucker storyline and making you really care about Ed and Al, and you really understand the laws. Pardon me, my phone went off. But you really understand the laws of alchemy, what it can and can't do. Because although alchemy is kind of a soft magic system, the rules are kind of firm in the few that we have. Because it's kind of like science. Anyway, it's like science in the fact that there are definite rules, but we don't know all the rules. Anyway, so the thing with Brotherhood in the first several episodes is they do too much too fast, and they really just glance over a bunch of things, but they're expecting everybody to have watched the 2003 series, and they expect most people to have read the manga. So a lot of the stuff that they just kind of glance over before they get into their own storylines that I'm told follow the manga a lot more closely than the 2003 show. But it's really hard to get invested, especially if you've never seen the original 2003 show, because a lot of the things that hit emotionally really hard in that show, in the 2003 show, don't hit very hard because they're just like glancing over. This happened in Harry Potter series 2, starting in the third movie. Excuse me. I can't watch Harry Potter with my mom for the simple fact that half the time I'm like, my mom will ask a question, and in answering it, I'll be like, well, if you read the book, you'll know this thing. And by the time I got to the fifth movie, and I'd done that like 3 times in the first 30 minutes, and it's like, okay, these are shit movies because they're not actually doing good storytelling. They're not assuming that not everybody in their audience has watched previous versions, because every time you have a new version coming out, that is any significant time after the original, yes, a huge portion of your audience is going to be the original thing's audience. But you also have to deal with the fact that they're bringing new people in. So you have to be able to explain things in such a way that the new people get it too. And they're not doing that. And Avatar is just as guilty. Because some things like the spirit realm or how bending works with martial arts, a lot of that just doesn't get explained. And if you've never seen the original show, you just feel like, okay, they're moving around and stuff is moving. And especially since a lot of the live action stuff and Korra doesn't adhere to it, you're like, if this is your first exposure to Avatar, a lot of people are like, yeah, I don't see the appeal of this. Of course you're not going to. You're not watching the thing they're actually referencing. So, moral of the story, watch the original Avatar. They're never going to make a good one. It's not going to work. No matter how hard they try. The first one was just magic. And you can't always capture magic a second time. So, I hope you enjoyed this. Let me know in the comments what you think about either this format or what I've had to say. I am open to constructive criticism, and I realize that I am not the only person who has feelings on this. Let me know your thoughts and feelings. I'm interested to hear. But please be polite when you do, both to me and other commenters. And I hope you enjoyed crafting with me on this today. Happy crafting!